Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to replace the rear brakes and rotors on a 2018 Buick Enclave. This is the same process for various other GM vehicles, including the Traverse, anywhere from years between 2018 to 2024. In addition, if you have one of these 2018 Enclaves or Traverses and you have a rear brake squeal when you reverse in the morning when the brakes are cold, I'll show you here today the bulletin that GM produced a couple years ago to show you the part number that you need to replace these pads with. That will take care of your problem. I see a lot of reviews and comments out there where people claim the dealerships can't fix it. It's as simple as replacing those pads and lubricating some of those shims. So I'll also show you how to fix that problem here today. If you guys are looking to replace the rear brake pads on some of these newer GM vehicles, you may or may not realize that in order to do that, you have to put the rear parking brake into service mode. If you do not do that, you will not be able to compress that rear caliper because the parking brake will be fully extended out. By putting it into service mode, it will retract the parking brake so you can compress the pistons back there. Now, if you went to any dealers or any local shops, you probably got the same answer that most of them give you, that the only way to do that is to use one of these expensive scanners. That's not necessarily true. There's a way to manually do this in the vehicle without the additional cost of one of these scanners. So let me show you how you can easily do this yourself at home. Alright, so real quick here, I'll walk through the individual steps, then I'll actually do the process. So the first thing you want to do is start the vehicle. After the vehicle is started, you're going to press and hold the brake. Then you're going to press and hold the parking brake over here for roughly 10 seconds until you see a yellow flash up there on the dash, and it'll continually flash. Once you see that, release your brake pedal. Then you're going to release your finger off of this parking brake then immediately press it again. Once you immediately press it again, then you'll see it flashing up there, then it's in service mode. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is we want to start the vehicle. Then you're going to press and hold the brake. Then you're going to press and hold the parking brake button over here for roughly 10 seconds until you see it start to flash yellow there on the right hand side. Now that it's flashing, release the brake pedal, release the parking brake, then hit the parking brake again really quick, and now it's going to put it in service mode. Once you see that the parking brake is released back there, and that on the right hand side there continually keeps flashing like it does here, it now means that we are in service mode for the parking brake back there, so now we can service the rear brakes. First thing we're going to do here is we're going to loosen up the brake reservoir cap, and the reason you need to do this is when we're compressing the pistons down there, it'll make that fluid raise. We just don't want to blow out any seals in there, so we'll go ahead and remove that and set it aside. Now we're ready to jack up the vehicle. We can't set the parking brake, so make sure you put wheel chocks on all your wheels to prevent the vehicle from rolling. Then we'll go ahead and jack up the vehicle and support it with some jack stands. And when you're doing this, there's no reason to jack up both sides at the same time. Just jack up one wheel at a time. We'll service this side, put the vehicle on the ground, then we'll jack up the other side. It's always going to be safer to have only one wheel off the ground versus having both of these off the ground in the back, because it's just a little bit better stability to also put a wheel chock on the other side. Then we'll go ahead and remove the wheel, and these are just going to be a 22 mil. Now we're ready to remove the caliper here. In order to do that, you just have two 14 mil guide pins that we're going to take out, and we'll be able to set that aside. But before we do that, we're going to take this clip off here and just pry it off the end of this bolt. And what this will do, this will give you a little bit more leeway here so you can get this caliper and hang it back here out of the way. If you don't do that, this hose is going to keep you restricted over here. And when you're removing these, if this whole pin's moving, just take an open end and just hold it right here. But usually these will come out like that. But if yours is spinning, just hold that bolt in there and you'll be able to easily remove it like that as well. and just gently pry it off like that. And we'll set it aside over here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove this bracket. In order to do that, you just have two 18 mil bolts over here. Alright, now we're ready to remove the rotor. In order to do that, you have a T30 here that you need to remove. Now sometimes it's easier to remove this when the caliper bracket's still over here, so it'll prevent this from moving, where you can stick a screwdriver in here and hold it. Or if you have it already removed like we have here, you can still hold it, but sometimes it's just a little bit harder, but nonetheless you can still remove it. And sometimes these will come off, and sometimes you got to get aggressive with them. Now we're ready to install our new rotor on here. If you notice, I have the genuine GM product here. My advice, if you're doing this, spend a little bit more money and get this GM part versus some of those aftermarket ones. Yes, those aftermarket companies will honor a warranty every year or two, every 10, 20,000 miles. You got to keep replacing them. But those ones back there, they've lasted around 78,000 miles. You'll have a lot better success with these. And if you go to Rock Auto or even Amazon, they're not that much more expensive, like $10 more a rotor for some of those generic ones. So my advice, get these genuine part ones. And we'll go ahead and install this T30 back on here. And this can get tightened up to 80 inch-pounds, or just gently snug it up. Moving on to the pads, we'll first go ahead and remove the old ones, and you want to make sure you pop these clips off as well. And we'll take a wire brush. And we'll spray it with a little brake clean. And we're going to go ahead and install the new clips. And again, I have the GM parts. And then we'll snap these in place. Next, we're going to lubricate the guide pins and both of these areas here where our pads will sit. So we'll gently pull this out. And you don't have to put a lot on here, just put a little bit on there, stick it back in there, and you want to make sure that it fully seats around that lip as well, like that. And one other comment real quick here, as you notice there on that one, it has a little bit of a black piece. This must be installed in the right orientation, so don't get these crossed. This one here has to go over here. Just make sure those are fully seated. Then we'll go ahead and lubricate the slides in here where our brake pads will sit. The next thing we're going to be doing is installing this bracket over here. Now, these bolts that came off of here, these are torque to angle bolts, which means you can reuse these if you clean these up and apply a little bit of thread locker. Just pay attention to the threads in here. If any of them look extended a little bit, just replace them. These are relatively cheap bolts, and here's the part number here for this one in the back. But I'll show you if you want to reuse them. All you got to do is just take a wire brush, clean this up a little bit, spray it down with a little brake clean, then just put a little thread lock on there. And again, these are torque to angle. Don't get them confused with torque to yield. Torque to yield bolts you cannot reuse. Torque to angle you can. So according to the manual, we can reuse these. Just make sure you clean them up a little bit. All right, so now we want to install our bracket back on here. Then we're going to tighten both of these bolts to 74 foot-pounds. Then you're going to do an additional 15 to 30 degrees. Alright, so there was the 74 foot-pounds. Now we'll go ahead and do an additional 15 to 30 degrees. Alright, so now we're ready to install our pads in here. And this is probably a good time to talk about that GM bulletin in regard to rear brake squeal in the morning when your vehicle's cold. What that bulletin talks about, it talks about the initial pads that were put on here. There was a little bit of material in that brake pad that they believed that was the issue. GM did revise it to a new part number for these rear brake pads. In addition, they also want you to make sure you thoroughly lubricate all of these shims in here. So not only on the pads and a little bit back here, you need to make sure you have all that lubricated. And more importantly, it's really probably just the pad, the different material that was in that older pad. So just make sure in the description, I'll put a link to both this bulletin and the part number that you need to use when you go ahead and reinstall these on your vehicle. So on these new pads, you're going to notice you're going to have a squeal indicator only on two pads. So just make sure you have one squeal indicator on this side, then the other will be on the other side. Then you have this other pad that'll go on the front. And on these GM pads, you're going to notice you're going to need to take that off because that's sticky, so that is on there for protection. Then we're going to go ahead and lubricate both of these areas. We'll install both of these in here. And you don't got to get wild with this. Just make sure you have good coverage on that pad. Alright, so now we're ready to compress our piston back in the caliper, and the reason you need to do this is because you have thicker pads on here, so that needs to be pushed back. Just pay attention to these notches in here. You're going to have a notch on your pad. That must line up with there where that notch is going to go in there. One comment real quick here on the lining up this piston. You're going to notice that you're going to have this GM logo right here. This has to be parallel with this notch right here. So on the left side, it's going to be on this side. On the right side, on the passenger side over there, this is going to be on the opposite side where it'll be down here. So just make sure when you're lining this up, see the GM logo, you see the angle there, just make sure that's flush like that. Then that means that is lined up for your pad. Then we'll go ahead and take our tool, And this is just a disc brake tool. You can find these at any auto parts store. They'll rent them for free, or I'll put a link in the description to this OTC one that I've used for many years. So you just put this in there, then you're going to line it up with those notches. And as you can see, it's compressing in. Now, one note here, you notice on some of the other models that you have to actually ratchet this in. You technically can just use a C-clamp, but the problem is you have all this plastic back here for that emergency brake. So I typically still use this piece, but you notice it's not twisting, it's only just compressing it in because we don't have that parking brake attached back there anymore because we're in that service mode. And once you get it fully compressed, just again make sure that's lined up with that notch in the back, and then we'll go ahead and install this back down here. And then put your guide pin bolts back in here. Then you want to tighten both of these bolts to 30 foot-pounds. If you're not sure if our piston notch is lined up with our pad, what you can do is you can look down in there and you can see that notch. If it looks like it's off a little bit, what you can do is take this screwdriver and you're going to see that notch on the end of the piston. Just gently push it down a little bit and you are able to rotate it in line. So just keep that in mind if it doesn't look like it's lined up. And we'll go ahead and reattach this clip here. And just go through and make sure all your bolts are tight and everything looks good on this side. Then repeat that same process on the other side. Once you're done replacing the pads and rotors on the other side, don't forget to reattach the brake reservoir cap up there. Then once you're done with that, the last thing we need to do is we need to get this vehicle out of service mode. If you remember at the beginning of the video, we had to put this thing in service mode, this electronic parking brake back here, which it retract the piston. Now we need to remove that service mode so it applies the parking brake so you can use it in the future. Then once you're done servicing the rear brakes in the back, you now need to get it back out of service mode. In order to do that, you're going to hold down the brake again, then you're going to hold down the parking brake over here for 10 seconds until you see that it releases the parking brake. Then once it releases the parking brake, that on the right hand side there will stop flashing, then you're now out of service mode. And now, as you can see, it released our parking brake, and now we're ready to go. All right, so hopefully this helped you out if you're struggling on how to get these rear brakes done with this electronic parking brake back here. If it did, please give me the thumbs up. If you're interested in more content like this, please hit that subscribe. But again, I hope this helped you out, and thanks for watching.